So there I was, diesel fumes still thick in the air from my barely 1-mile drive, when this woman in a neon green tracksuit struts up my driveway in designer heels and slaps a $500 citation on my windshield like she's delivering a court order. Evidently, my U-Haul was a threat to the sacred visual balance of Willowbrook Estates. I'm Marcus, and I hadn't even shut off the engine before the HOA president, let's call her Deirdre, whips out a stack of pre-printed violation slips thicker than an old phone book. 14 in total, mailbox height, lawn length, gourmet color. I swear, if there had been a clause for excessive breathing, she would have used it. Standing there, radiating the scent of discount perfume and entitlement, she informs me I have 48 hours to cough up to $1,100 or risk foreclosure. But here's what made me grin. Deirdre had no idea she'd just gone to war with the guy who owns her lease. Tell me, what would you do if an HOA dictator ambushed you before you'd even unpacked your toothbrush? And where are you watching from? I'll get to how I ended up here, but let's rewind a bit. 3 months earlier, I was living in Phoenix, managing commercial properties for a company that suddenly decided my entire department was redundant to decades of keeping their buildings profitable, and they thanked me with a cardboard box and a security escort. To top it off, my ex-wife chose that exact moment to announce she was keeping the house and moving in with her yoga instructor, a guy named Moonbeam who sells crystals at farmers markets. So when Great Aunt Millicent's lawyer called to tell me she'd left me her house in Colorado, it felt like someone threw me a life preserver. Millicent, my grandmother's sister, was a tiny powerhouse of a woman who could rebuild a carburetor and run a church bake sale in the same weekend. After Uncle Frank was killed in Vietnam, she raised 3 kids alone, worked double shifts, and still managed to feed every stray cat in a 5-block radius. Here's one thing to decades in property management will teach you: always read the fine print, especially when an HOA is involved. They're basically mini governments with all the corruption potential and none of the oversight. Quick tip: HOA boards have fiduciary responsibilities just like corporate directors, meaning they can be held personally liable for financial mismanagement. Keep that in mind. It'll come up later. The house sat on a corner lot in Willowbrook Estates, 47 homes, originally middle class when it was built in '79, now gentrified into a status symbol. It's the kind of neighborhood where people drive Telus but still argue over who ordered the extra appetizer. HOA dues had inflated to $180 a month, supposedly for landscaping, pool upkeep, and community standards enforcement, which sounds as ominous as it is. I should have known something was off when the lawyer mentioned Millicent had a few ongoing disputes with the association, but I brushed it off as typical old lady stuff. Maybe she planted peonies instead of petunias or committed the unforgivable act of owning a garden gnome. Sweet, naive me. Fast forward to August, the asphalt's melting under the heat when Deirdre makes her grand entrance from a spotless white BMW, like some suburban Terminator. She's the ultimate HOA Karen, the former homecoming queen of 1987, still clinging to her glory days. Her casual outfit probably cost more than a month's mortgage, and she's got a professional-grade camera hanging from her neck like she's documenting war crimes instead of chipped mailboxes. She circles my truck with military precision, the shutter clicking faster than a Geiger counter at Chernobyl. My teeth hurt just hearing it. Then come the pre-printed citations, thick cardstock, embossed header, my name already printed in elegant calligraphy. This wasn't impulsive pettiness. This was premeditated bureaucracy. Commercial vehicles are strictly forbidden in residential areas, she declares, pointing at the faded company logo on my F-150. Never mind that it's my personal ride. Apparently, Phoenix Property Solutions on the door makes me a threat to the environment. Next offense, unauthorized landscaping modifications. She gestures dramatically toward Aunt Millicent's rose bushes, these gorgeous bank climbers that had been there since the Carter administration. Now deemed illegal because nobody submitted Form 7B to the Sacred Committee of Aesthetic Purity. Then came the kicker: mailbox exhibits paint degradation exceeding community standards. I kid you not. She said it like she was diagnosing stage 4 mailbox cancer. There were maybe 3 tiny chips you'd only notice if you were actively searching for imperfection. What really caught my attention: though, or the neighbors, watching from behind curtains like witnesses to a mob hit. No one dared meet her eyes. An old woman across the street slammed her blinds shut when Deirdre turned her head. A man washing his car suddenly remembered he had urgent tire pressure issues. And then, Deirdre delivered the kill shot. The previous homeowner had her fair share of compliance issues before her untimely death, and the way Deirdre said "unfortunate" sent a chill down my spine. Like Millicent's passing was just another box checked on her efficiency spreadsheet. I kept my composure and asked to review the HOA covenants and financial statements. You'd think I'd requested her personal diary and bank pins. Suddenly, everything was classified information requiring board approval and official procedures. When I casually mentioned that I used to run commercial property operations, her sugary smile faltered, exposing something sharp beneath the surface. She promised appropriate enforcement actions, clicked away on those designer heels, and left me standing there with $2,100 in bogus fines and an easy feeling that I'd just been added to a hit list. What she didn't know: I wasn't just a property manager. I was a property owner, including, as fate would have it, the house she currently lived in. The next morning, I woke to find a certified letter shoved into my doorframe like a mob warning. Deirdre had leveled up overnight. This wasn't a routine citation, it was psychological warfare, the kind of bureaucratic intimidation that would make a Pentagon strategist take notes. The letter demanded immediate payment of all fines, which had mysteriously ballooned to $2,870 thanks to administrative adjustments and late penalties that seemed to breed in the dark. Attached were time-stamped photos from every conceivable angle, forensic-grade evidence that would make a CSI tech cry tears of admiration, along with a warning of lien placement within 30 days. She'd CC'd everyone from the management company to some attorney whose name practically screamed forecloses on widows for fun, but that was Deirdre's first mistake, assuming I was just another nervous homeowner who'd fold faster than a lawn chair. What she didn't realize was that 20 years in commercial property management teaches you one critical survival skill: how to actually read the fine print everyone else scrolls past like software terms and conditions. So, I did the logical thing. I drove to the county recorder's office, which, if you've never been, is like the DMV's grumpier sibling. Imagine flickering fluorescent lights that make everyone look undead, air that smells like damp paper and disappointment, and clerks who act like you personally caused every misplaced file in existence. But here's the beauty of public records: even Deirdre's miniature empire had to obey real laws, not whatever nonsense she scribbled on wine-stained napkins. What I found was juicier than a reality TV scandal. The original 1983 HOA covenants barely resembled Deirdre's modern-day manifesto. The founding document was a modest 12-page guide filled with reasonable requests: keep your yard tidy, paint your house something normal, and don't turn your driveway into a used car lot. Over time, those simple rules had mutated into a 47-page authoritarian nightmare dictating everything from the approved color of Christmas wreaths to designated dog-walking zones. I remembered reading that major HOA amendments require homeowner votes. If those votes never happened, the new rules carried all the legal weight of a chocolate teapot. Even better, Aunt Millicent's property had a special grandfathered clause for landscaping. Those offending rose bushes, explicitly protected under the original covenant as established plantings. Deirdre's citation wasn't worth the cardstock it was printed on. But the real goldmine was in the HOA's financials records I was fully entitled to review. What I found made the data analyst in me light up like a slot machine. Numbers that didn't add up. Expenses inflated beyond reason. A budget that looked like it had been written by someone whose only accounting experience came from reading fortune cookies. That's when Gladys appeared, and I mean appeared, like a secret agent from the neighborhood resistance. 78 years old, retired librarian, and sharper than a box of tacks. She'd been watching from across the street and decided I looked like someone she could trust. "You're asking about the HOA," she whispered, scanning the area like we were plotting a prison break. "Good. It's about time." She handed me a folder thick enough to deflect a bullet. Inside was a meticulous archive of Deirdre's 2-year reign of terror. 12 families targeted. The same pattern every time: excessive fines, impossible deadlines, and forced sales at prices well below market value. And guess whose real estate firm kept swooping in for the listings? 3 guesses, and you won't need the first 2. 3 elderly homeowners had already been driven out. Mrs. Olivia, fined because her mailbox post leaned 2 degrees off vertical. The Rodriguez family, cited for excessive children's toys because their kids left a bike in the yard. Mr. Patterson, a Korean War veteran, charged for flying a flag that was improperly proportioned for his pole. That afternoon, Deirdre returned, this time with backup. Her boyfriend, Chad, strutted up wearing what looked like a fake security badge straight off a costume website. They demanded entry to inspect for interior covenant violations, something that exists only in Deirdre's fantasy version of property law. I politely declined, citing the Fourth Amendment and basic homeowner rights. Chad started snapping photos through my windows like a wannabe private investigator. That's when I decided to drop my first breadcrumb. Funny thing, I said loudly enough for the nearby curtains to twitch. The whole budget lists 40 grand in landscaping expenses, but the actual contractor only got 15. Makes you wonder where that missing 25 grand actually went. The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a dust mote sneeze. Deirdre's face cycled through more shades than a neon sign shorting out. While Chad suddenly remembered he had pressing business somewhere very far away, they retreated to their BMW faster than vampires at sunrise. But not before Deirdre hissed something about serious legal repercussions for harassment. I just smiled and waved as they sped off. After all, I was only getting started. Her retaliation came quick and subtle as a brick through a window. The next morning, I'm sipping coffee and watching the sunrise when a city code enforcement truck rolls up. Out steps a weary-looking inspector who already seems sorry to be there. "Got a report about an abandoned commercial vehicle," he mutters, glancing at his clipboard like it personally wronged him. He walks around my perfectly legal F-150, finds nothing remotely out of order, and apologizes for wasting both our mornings. Before he leaves, though, he leans in and quietly says, "Anonymous tip came in around 6 a.m. Caller knew your exact address and the truck's description." Pretty specific for a random passerby. 2 hours later, I get a call from the state contractor's licensing board. Someone had filed a complaint claiming I was running an unlicensed business out of my house. The investigator was polite but had to confirm, was I operating Phoenix Property Solutions from this address? I explained that I'd left the company, wasn't running anything, and the decals were just leftovers from my old job. Case closed in 5 minutes flat, but the message was loud and clear. Deirdre was done playing nice. That night, around 2 a.m., I hear footsteps crunching on gravel outside. When you live alone, you get good at identifying sounds that don't belong, and these definitely didn't. I peeked through the blinds just in time to see a white BMW creeping past like a low-budget spy thriller. The next morning, I find my mailbox freshly decorated with spray paint. Nothing obscene, just random squiggles, the kind designed to trigger another violation notice. On the porch sat a neatly placed pile of dog waste, positioned with the kind of precision that screamed intentional. Good thing I'd installed security cameras the day before. Property management makes you paranoid. Too many tenants who think deposits are optional. The footage was priceless. Deirdre's BMW, time-stamped at 2:17 a.m., looping past the house. Crystal clear shots of her license plate. And Chad skulking through my yard like the world's least effective ninja. But while Deirdre was busy with her midnight graffiti campaign, I was diving deeper into the HOA's finances, and what I uncovered was messier than a pretzel factory explosion. Remember that missing landscaping money? That was just the appetizer. The pool cleaning contract was the real piece de resistance, $800 a month for a community pool barely 30 feet long that saw about as much use as a snow cone in winter. I called a few local companies. Real professionals quoted about $200 for the same job. But Elite Pool Services was somehow 4 times the market rate, despite the pool looking like a Petri dish experiment. Murky green water, dead leaves floating like lily pads, and a stench that could have predated the Clinton administration. Then came the landscaping deal of $3,000 a month for comprehensive maintenance. Translation, mowing 47 small front yards and trimming a few shrubs. I've managed commercial centers with smaller upkeep budgets. But apparently, Mountain View Landscaping offered premium service if showing up twice a month with a mower counts as premium. The legal fees were the final cherry, $15,000 a year for routine compliance enforcement. Most HOA letters spend maybe a tenth of that, and only when they're actually solving real issues. But apparently, enforcing mailbox paint standards required the kind of legal arsenal used in corporate mergers. By now, my digging had started to attract neighborhood allies. Bob, a Vietnam vet with hands like engine blocks, dropped by with a beer and a few sharp observations. Sophia, a single mom and paralegal, offered to help with legal research. Even Pastor Williams from the local church came over to show support. Apparently, Deirdre had once tried to have the church fined for excessive parking during Sunday worship, but our whole dictator wasn't out of tricks yet. Next, she filed a police report accusing me of aggressively confronting her and making threatening statements about her finances. Officer Rodriguez arrived, clearly amused. One glance at my security footage, and he knew the complaint was bogus. Word of advice, he said quietly before leaving. Document everything. These types usually get worse before they get better. That's when Deirdre went full delusional. She actually demanded Officer Rodriguez arrest me for disturbing the peace and intimidating a public official. Apparently, being an HOA president now counted as government service. Rodriguez stayed calm but firm. Ma'am, he said, asking questions about HOA finances isn't a crime. Filing false police reports, however, is. As he drove away and Deirdre stomped back to her BMW, it hit me. I wasn't just dealing with a petty control freak anymore. This was someone cornered. People don't spiral like that unless they've got something serious to hide. And up in Great Aunt Millicent's dusty attic, I was about to find out exactly what that was. Deirdre's panic reached new heights when she called an emergency HOA board meeting with exactly 24 hours notice. Which, unsurprisingly, broke the very bylaws that required a minimum of 72 hours notice. But desperate people don't read fine print, they just plow forward and pray no one catches the smell of their legal dumpster fire. The emergency meeting took place in Deirdre's living room, which felt less like a neighborhood gathering and more like being summoned to the principal's office, if the principal wore yoga pants and lit an entire forest's worth of vanilla candles. She'd arranged the space like a courtroom, perched behind a massive oak desk that probably cost more than most people's sedans. The printed agenda conveniently on her real estate firm's letterhead had exactly one item: emergency foreclosure proceedings for 1247 Maple Street. Only 3 of the 5 board members showed up. The other 2 had suddenly developed scheduling conflicts. Without a quorum, they couldn't legally vote on anything more serious than which brand of donut holes to order. But that didn't slow Deirdre down as she charged ahead like a freight train with the brakes cut. Then, in walked Gladys, my personal guardian angel in orthopedic shoes, standing in the doorway like the avenging spirit of librarians everywhere. This woman, who'd spent months being bullied into silence, found her voice and unleashed it like scripture. Point of order, she declared, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. You cannot conduct official business without a quorum. This meeting is procedurally invalid. That's when Deirdre's mask shattered. She screamed, actually screamed at Gladys, calling her a meddling old busybody and threatening to fine her for interfering with official proceedings. The transformation was breathtaking, from suburban royalty to an unhinged dictator in under 3 seconds. While Deirdre was losing her composure, I was finding my breakthrough. Sophia, our resident paralegal and quiet powerhouse, had uncovered something that made my professional instincts light up: a tangled web of shell companies, more twisted than Christmas lights after a tornado. Turns out, Mountain View Landscaping wasn't just some random contractor. It was owned by Deirdre's 23-year-old nephew, whose resume included GameStop cashier and fired pizza delivery guy, elite pool services. That was Chad's little side hustle, the same Chad whose understanding of pool maintenance came entirely from YouTube tutorials and misplaced confidence. And Legal Solutions LLC, That belonged to Deirdre's old college roommate, running a firm that specialized in what I'll generously call creative interpretations of HOA law. Every vendor traced back to Deirdre's inner circle, of all billing rates high enough to make luxury resorts blush. I'd seen this racket before in commercial real estate. Board members funneling contracts to friends and relatives, skimming profits under the guise of community service. But the real smoking gun came when I started cross-referencing violation patterns across the neighborhood. Her enforcement wasn't random, it was targeted, surgical. She went after the vulnerable, elderly homeowners, single parents, anyone too tired or broke to fight back. The Hendersons were fined for owning a non-compliant garden gnome, while the McMansion 3 doors down with genuine code violations remained untouched. My informal coffee meetups at Rosie's Diner had evolved into full-blown resistance meetings. At the latest one, 23 residents showed up, each with their own HOA horror story. Mrs. Patterson recounted how Deandra fined her for excessive memorial decorations, her crime, placing a small American flag beside her late husband's photo. The Johnsons were cited because their children's chalk drawings exceeded the temporary art duration limit. Apparently, even kid doodles now required board approval. Then came Bob's report, the final nail in Deirdre's designer coffin. Bob, a Vietnam vet and retired engineer, had the kind of hands that could rebuild a tank and the precision to match. His independent assessment of the neighborhood infrastructure read like a financial crime thriller: thousands charged for road repairs that never happened, phantom drainage projects, and a security system that amounted to one broken camera pointed at a tree. That's when Deirdre went full scorched earth. She hired a private investigator, probably from the same discount agency where Chad bought his fake badge, to dig up dirt on me. Suddenly, rumors spread faster than gossip at a Sunday potluck. According to her, my military discharge was dishonorable. It wasn't. I was gang-affiliated, apparently living in Phoenix makes you suspicious, and I'd blackmailed my great-aunt for her property, an impressive feat, considering she'd already passed before my alleged scheme began. The racial undertones weren't subtle. Deirdre weaponized every suburban stereotype she could think of, casting me as the outsider threatening their precious enclave. She even created fake social media profiles to spread her nonsense, because nothing screams credible leadership like anonymous online trolling. But while she was busy building her fortress of lies, I was assembling my arsenal of proof. Every violation, every meeting, every inflated contract meticulously documented and cross-referenced. It was the kind of airtight paper trail that would make an FBI forensic accountant misty-eyed. Then Deirdre played her last desperate card, a certified letter claiming I owed $47,000 in special assessments for new amenities, a playground, upgraded security, and roadwork, none of which actually existed. Payment due in 10 days, or she'd file a lien. I read that letter twice and laughed. She'd just given me the overreach I'd been waiting for, and one mistake that would bring her entire empire down. It was finally time to show Deirdre what happens when you pick a fight with someone who actually reads the contract. The court-ordered financial disclosures landed on a Thursday morning that smelled like rain and reckoning. My attorney had worked some legal sorcery, and suddenly, Deirdre's closely guarded secrets were spread across my dining room table like evidence from a federal sting. What I found there made 20 years of property management scandals look like kids playing make-believe. Over $300,000 had disappeared from HOA accounts through an elaborate shell game that would have made Bernie Madoff proud. Deirdre hadn't been content with skimming a few dollars here and there. She'd engineered a full-blown money laundering scheme disguised as community improvements. Fake emergency assessments for imaginary repairs. Invoices for materials that never existed. Payments issued to contractors who turned out to be her relatives with freshly minted business licenses. But the real bombshell came buried in the property title documents. My attorney's research team had been thorough, and hidden deep in the mineral rights section was a detail that made my morning coffee taste like victory: Great Aunt Millicent's property sat on a small natural gas deposit. Nothing massive, but enough that Rocky Mountain Energy had been paying royalties for 3 years. Those royalty payments should have gone to the property owner. Instead, they'd been rerouted straight into the HOA's general fund, with Deirdre as the sole signatory. That was $18,000 of my money quietly stolen and spent without my consent. That single discovery gave me legal standing to demand a full forensic audit of every HOA transaction since the day she took office. The key to everything, literally, was hiding in plain sight. Tucked between my great-aunt's apple pie and pot roast recipes was a small brass key labeled safety deposit box. Inside that box, I found 5 years of meticulous records, a kind of evidence that would make a federal prosecutor break into applause. There were audio recordings of Deirdre bragging about creative accounting and bending the rules. Forged homeowner signatures on covenant amendments that had never been officially voted on. Bank statements showing systematic theft disguised as legitimate expenses. And then came the gut punch, a handwritten letter from Great-Aunt Millicent herself, penned just 2 weeks before she passed. Marcus, if you're reading this, Deirdre Pickering has likely tried to destroy what's left of our community. I've gathered what I could, but I'm too old and too tired to fight her anymore. Maybe you aren't. The proof is all here. Make them answer for what they've done. Suddenly, her heart attack didn't feel so random. Her medical records, which I'd subpoenaed during probate, showed dangerously high blood pressure starting right when Deirdre's harassment began. The stress of battling corruption had literally killed her. And knowing Deirdre, she probably celebrated when her biggest obstacle conveniently died. My mission changed in that moment. This wasn't about fines or law violations anymore. This was about justice, about honoring the memory of a woman who'd spent her final months protecting her neighbors from a predator. The evidence pointed to a laundry list of federal crimes: mail fraud, wire fraud, embezzlement, a kind of thing that gets the FBI's attention. Her real estate license violations alone could fill a binder. The total theft approached $450,000, counting inflated contracts, fake assessments, and stolen royalties. The best part: Deirdre had no idea how much evidence existed. She thought she was dealing with one irritated homeowner asking nosy questions. She had no clue that Great-Aunt Millicent had spent years building an airtight case, or that I now held every piece of it. The upcoming annual HOA meeting was legally mandatory and couldn't be canceled once notice went out. Major decisions required 67% homeowner attendance. That meant I needed 32 people in that room. According to my coffee shop intelligence network, I already had commitments from 31. Deirdre's empire was about to collapse, so she just didn't know it yet. Great-Aunt Millicent's dining room had transformed into a hybrid between a war room and an FBI field office. Her antique table was pushed against the wall, buried under bankers' boxes, legal files, and a massive timeline strung together with red thread connecting photos, invoices, and violation letters. It looked like a detective's dream come true. Gladys had appointed herself chief intelligence officer, arriving daily with homemade cookies and the organizational rigor of a career librarian. Sophia, my secret weapon, turned out to be a legal research prodigy disguised as a paralegal. She practically lived in the law library, surfacing each night with case precedents and procedural loopholes that impressed even my attorney. Her dining table was covered in color-coded folders: red for criminal, blue for civil, yellow for procedural. It looked like a rainbow of justice. Building the legal team felt like assembling the Avengers of HOA accountability. My lead attorney, Jennifer Olivia, had 15 years of HOA law experience and a reputation for making corrupt board members cry in depositions. The forensic accountant she brought on could trace laundered money through more shell companies than a Russian oligarch's accountant. We added a private investigator who specialized in financial crimes, and a media consultant, a former investigative journalist who knew exactly how to make the story hit hard. When the state's Consumer Protection Division offered pro bono support, I knew this had grown beyond a petty neighborhood feud. Government attorneys don't volunteer their weekends unless something big is brewing. The movement that followed felt less like a complaint campaign and more like a grassroots revolution. I went door to door like I was running for office, explaining residents' rights and exposing Deirdre's financial con. Sophia set up a WhatsApp group that exploded from 5 members to 37 in just 2 weeks, neighbors sharing evidence, screenshots, and moral support after years of intimidation. Pastor Williams offered the church basement for our meetings, giving our cause a sense of moral weight Deirdre couldn't counter. Bob contributed his engineering expertise, documenting every fake infrastructure project she'd charged for a non-existent roadwork, phantom drainage repairs, and a security system that was literally just one broken camera pointed at a tree. Meanwhile, the forensic accountant dissected her financials with surgical precision. Every shady dollar was traced through subpoenaed bank records from the Attorney General's office. The pattern was elegant in its corruption, fake invoices leading to inflated payments, funneled through family shell companies, landing neatly in Deirdre's accounts. The presentation he created looked less like an audit and more like a flowchart for organized crime, which, frankly, it was. Sophia compiled enough legal paperwork to choke a courthouse clerk. Cease and desist letters for harassment, injunctions to freeze HOA accounts, criminal referrals for multiple agencies, and a class action framework for the affected homeowners. Deirdre had built her HOA into a personal empire of fear and fraud. We were about to turn it into her downfall. Sophia had also drafted a homeowner petition demanding Deirdre's removal from the board on the grounds of financial misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty. Our media strategy revolved around Sarah Mitchell, a sharp local journalist known for exposing government corruption. She'd been digging into HOA abuse cases across Colorado and treated our story like Christmas morning for an investigative reporter. Once the Denver TV affiliate heard about the scale of financial fraud and the elderly residents who'd been driven from their homes, they wanted in. 2. The evidence file had grown into an 847-page dossier of bank records, audio clips, videos, and witness statements. From my years in commercial property management, I knew one thing about judges: they love visuals. So, we compiled before and after photos comparing approved improvement projects to the depressing reality. The difference was damning. Invoices for a playground that never existed. Bills for road work that was never done. Payments for landscaping that looked like it had been handled by blindfolded amateurs with broken lawnmowers, to make sure I could deliver under pressure. I practiced my presentation with the community theater troupe that met at Pastor Williams's church. Nothing prepares you for a hostile audience quite like amateur actors who think they're directors. They helped me fine-tune my pacing, anticipate Deirdre's rebuttals, and craft responses that would hold up in front of cameras and legal observers alike. Sophia compiled all the knowledge we'd gathered into a homeowner's handbook, HOA Rights and Remedies. It broke down the essentials, demanding financial transparency, challenging discriminatory enforcement, and spotting the red flags of board-level corruption. Most residents had no idea that HOA board members carry the same fiduciary responsibilities as corporate executives, meaning they can be personally liable for financial misconduct. I remembered reading about a case in Texas where board members were forced to pay restitution from their personal assets after a forensic audit exposed widespread theft. That story stuck with me, and it became our rallying point. We locked in the community center for the annual HOA meeting, complete with professional recording gear and official observers from the Attorney General's office. The media was invited, too, because nothing inspires honesty like the possibility of ending up on the evening news. That night, as I sat in Great Aunt Millicent's kitchen surrounded by boxes of evidence and the quiet hum of purpose, I felt a kind of calm I hadn't known since my military days. That steady confidence that comes from absolute preparation and moral clarity. Deirdre had no idea what was coming. When she finally realized how large our coalition had grown, her reaction was like watching a trapped animal recognize the cage door had just slammed shut. The neighborhood gossip network, more efficient than any intelligence agency, had clearly tipped her off that residents were organizing. Her response was pure panic wrapped in delusion. First, she tried to cancel the annual meeting, citing security concerns and the threat of violent agitators. The irony was almost poetic. The woman who'd spent years terrorizing retirees was suddenly clutching her pearls over her safety. But Colorado state law leaves no wiggle room. Once proper notice is issued, you can't cancel a mandatory HOA meeting just because democracy makes you uncomfortable. Next, she hired a private security firm to intimidate homeowners. That backfired spectacularly when the security manager realized He was being asked to act as muscle in a suburban power struggle. Real professionals don't enjoy being turned into HOA enforcers, especially when their client can't articulate what threats they're supposed to defend against. Then came the disinformation campaign. According to the Deirdre Pickering rumor factory, I was plotting a violent uprising that would tank property values and bring dangerous outsiders into the neighborhood. She even told Mrs. Rodriguez I was leading a gang takeover, which must have been news to our supposed gang of retired librarians, church volunteers, and veterans. Meanwhile, her financial empire was crumbling. She'd attempted to withdraw the remaining $89,000 from HOA accounts, only to discover the bank had frozen the funds pending the Attorney General's investigation. When that failed, she tried to destroy the financial records, an act that instantly added obstruction of justice to her list of crimes. In one particularly desperate move, she even tried to bribe the forensic accountant with real estate commissions, apparently unaware that offering financial incentives to an expert witness in an active case is the kind of thing that lands people in federal prison. The harassment escalated from pathetic to obsessive. Suddenly, fake reviews appeared on every professional site I'd ever been listed on, claiming I was violent and unstable, and a threat to the community. She filed false reports with the DMV, alleging my truck was mechanically unsafe. And then there was Chad, her ever-loyal sidekick, who started tailing me to job interviews like some dollar store private. Let me tell you, there's nothing quite like trying to rebuild your career while your whole president's boyfriend is lurking in the parking lot pretending to check his phone. But Deirdre's most surreal stunt happened at the grocery store. I noticed her at the end of every aisle, pretending to shop while tracking my movements like a discount secret agent. When I confronted her, she claimed she was monitoring community safety threats. The store manager, bless him, calmly informed her that following customers counts as stalking and showed her the door. The violation notices she sent to my allies were masterworks of petty tyranny. Gladys was cited for excessive bird feeding, allegedly attracting undesirable wildlife. Sophia got written up because her kids' bicycles were improperly stored inside her own garage. Bob received a citation for displaying his military flag on a non-federal holiday. Then came the anonymous late-night phone calls, whispered warnings telling elderly residents to mind their business or face consequences. When Gladys's car windshield mysteriously cracked overnight, the message couldn't have been clearer. Deirdre Pickering was unraveling and she knew it. Deirdre was now willing to cross into vandalism to keep her grip on power. One morning, Sophia found a bouquet of wilted flowers on her doorstep, accompanied by a note that read, "Mind your own business, or this could be you." Subtle as a brick through a window and just as cowardly. When we reported it, Officer Rodriguez sighed, scribbled something in his notebook, and added it to what he called the Pickering file. Apparently, we weren't her first victims. But while Deirdre was busy playing suburban terrorist, I was quietly documenting every single offense, each threat, act of vandalism, and attempt at intimidation captured, photographed, and filed with law enforcement. Her longtime attorney, the same college roommate who'd been shielding her schemes, suddenly quit the case, realizing she was way out of her depth. Criminal exposure wasn't something a civil lawyer wanted her name attached to. Her replacement immediately tried to cut a plea deal, offering partial restitution in exchange for leniency. I refused. No half measures, no settlements. Not unless it included full repayment and criminal prosecution. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about justice for Great Aunt Millicent, and for every neighbor she'd bullied into silence. The neighborhood's response was nothing short of inspiring. Overnight, yard signs appeared, transparency in whole management. Local business owners offered to host meetings. A retired police officer volunteered to handle security at the upcoming showdown. As the annual meeting drew closer, Deirdre's panic went nuclear. But every desperate stunt she pulled only made our case stronger, and the community angrier. She was about to learn a timeless truth: intimidation works, until the people you're scaring stop being afraid. Her meltdown started when she realized the criminal investigations were no longer theoretical. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division had begun asking questions. The state attorney general's office was building a case. Even her new lawyer had backed away, labeling her too toxic to represent. Cornered, she spiraled straight into what I can only describe as a tactical retreat to Crazy Town. She tried to flee to her sister's place in Montana, apparently believing that crossing a state line would erase federal mail fraud charges. Unfortunately for her, the court had already frozen her credit cards, and her BMW broke down somewhere outside Denver. Nothing says criminal mastermind like being stranded on I-25 because you can't afford a tow truck. 48 hours later, she crept back into Willowbrook Estates, disheveled and defeated, looking like she'd been living out of her car, which, to be fair, she probably had. Neighbors watched from behind their curtains as the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA limped home like a fugitive returning from a failed escape. Then came her most desperate move yet, a bribery attempt so clumsy it could have been a deleted scene from a bad mob movie. She showed up at my doorstep at 11 p.m., lugging a duffel bag stuffed with $50,000 in cash, and said, with a straight face, "Let's put this unpleasantness behind us." She had no idea I was wearing a wire for the FBI. Agent Martinez had suggested it after her failed getaway, and apparently, my property management experience made me a decent candidate for undercover work. The recording was glorious, 47 minutes of Deirdre incriminating herself. She admitted to diverting whole funds, fabricating assessments, and getting creative with accounting to support her lavish lifestyle. My favorite part. When she actually said, "You know how these communities are, the residents are sheep. They need someone to make decisions for them. I was providing a service." I'm pretty sure the FBI agent listening through my earpiece snapped a pencil in half. That attempted bribe added another felony to her collection, but more importantly, it gave us a confession that made the case airtight. She just handed the federal government the keys to her own cell. Meanwhile, the community had united like never before. 41 of 47 households had joined our cause. The 6 holdouts. All family members are people financially tied to Deirdre. Our legal aid fund for elderly homeowners had grown to $12,000, built entirely on small neighborhood donations, proof that solidarity is stronger than fear. The local restaurant owner offered to cater the annual meeting, and the hardware store donated supplies to repair vandalized property. Even our mail carrier got involved, filing reports whenever suspicious activity appeared near our homes. Federal workers, it turns out, take mail tampering very personally. The story was spreading beyond Willowbrook. HOA reform groups picked it up online, and soon our inboxes were flooded with messages from people across the country facing their own petty tyrants. The hashtag Aunt Milla's ENTS Army started trending in property management circles. It wasn't exactly viral fame, but for us, it was validation, or proof that our fight mattered. As for Deirdre's professional life, it imploded. Her real estate brokerage fired her the moment the bribery tape surfaced. The state licensing board suspended her pending investigation. Former clients began filing ethics complaints that stretched back years. She tried to declare bankruptcy to hide assets, which only made federal prosecutors more curious about where those assets were buried. And then came the ultimate irony: her own home went into foreclosure. The woman who'd spent years threatening others with financial ruin couldn't pay her own mortgage once her empire of fraud collapsed. Karma, it seemed, had a dark sense of humor. Her final act was pure desperation theater. She planned to portray herself as a victim, claim I was an outside agitator sent to destroy the neighborhood, and shift blame to the management company. She even brought Chad and a few loyal relatives to pack the meeting with fake supporters, and reached out to other HOA letters, warning them that outsiders like me might come for them next. But while she scrambled to fake unity, I was perfecting a presentation that would end her reign once and for all. The forensic accountant's report was devastatingly clear, a financial autopsy that left no room for denial. The attorney's legal review identified 12 separate felonies, each backed by rock-solid evidence. Bob's engineering analysis exposed thousands of dollars squandered on phantom infrastructure projects, while the private investigator's surveillance had captured ongoing fraud in real time. The night before the long-awaited HOA meeting, I drove out to visit Great Aunt Millicent's grave one last time. I told her everything about the evidence we'd uncovered, the neighbors we'd united, and the justice we were about to deliver. The August air was warm and still, fireflies flickering above the headstone like tiny lanterns of approval. Tomorrow, Deirdre Pickering would finally face the reckoning my aunt had started building long before she died. And I intended to make sure every moment of it honored her memory. By sunrise, the community center buzzed with the kind of nervous electricity you feel just before a storm breaks. By 7 a.m., residents were already filing and hauling folding chairs, clutching thermoses of coffee, and claiming seats like fans waiting for a sold-out show. The sharp scent of floor wax mixed with caffeine and tension. 73 residents crammed into a room built for 50. Local news crews lined the back wall of cameras, microphones, tripods like they were covering a congressional hearing instead of a suburban HOA showdown. Sarah Mitchell, our journalist ally, had her notebook open. The Denver TV affiliate's investigative team was already rolling. Apparently, whole corruption had become headline material. Then, Deirdre arrived 20 minutes late, making what she clearly thought was a power entrance. Flanked by Chad and 3 reluctant relatives, she strutted in wearing a crisp navy blazer that screamed, "I'm still in charge," and clutching a briefcase that probably contained more empty threats than actual legal documents. Her first move was a brazen one. She tried to seize control of the meeting, spouting off about procedural authority and board prerogatives like a suburban dictator quoting a monarchy handbook. She announced that her first order of business was my removal from the community for disruptive behavior and endangering safety. That's when Gladys rose from her chair, equal parts librarian, warrior, and angel of parliamentary justice. "Point of order," she thundered, her voice echoing across the hall. Under Colorado law and our own bylaws, homeowners must be given the right to speak before any business is conducted. You cannot remove residents without due process. The room erupted with applause, cheers, and shouts of agreement. Deirdre's face flushed through more shades than a malfunctioning neon sign. She banged a gavel she didn't technically have the authority to use. But the crowd wasn't listening. When I finally took the floor, I felt the calm certainty that comes when truth is on your side. I began by honoring Great Aunt Millicent, explaining how her love for this community had driven her to spend her final years documenting every ounce of corruption she could find. Then came the visuals, and they hit like precision-guided missiles. Financial charts showing the systematic theft of $447,000. Before and after photos revealing that promised improvements existed only on paper. Audio recordings of Deirdre herself bragging about her creative accounting and describing residents as sheep who need leadership. The reaction was instant and raw. Gasps filled the room as people grasped the scale of the theft. Elderly neighbors wept softly as they realized why they'd been targeted. Outraged voices rose when the racial undertones of Deirdre's enforcement patterns became impossible to ignore. Then Deirdre snapped. She shot to her feet, shrieking about forgeries and conspiracies. Her voice trembled as she accused me of orchestrating a smear campaign to destroy the community. And then, in a moment that sealed her fate, she played the race card. She sneered, implying that people like me couldn't possibly understand traditional community values. For a heartbeat, the room went silent. Then, like a dam breaking, decades of shared loyalty and friendship erupted into fury. These were people who'd watched each other's children grow, comforted each other through loss and hardship, and now, they'd seen exactly what Deirdre thought of them. I played the final piece of evidence, the recording of her attempted bribe. Her voice was crystal clear. "You understand how these communities work, right? The residents are sheep." I was providing a service by being creative with the accounting. Chad jumped up, shouting that the recording was illegal. But Jennifer Olivia, my attorney, was ready, calmly citing Colorado's single-party consent law for recorded conversations. That was the moment everything collapsed for Deirdre. Her face cycled through the 5 stages of grief in real time. Denial, anger, bargaining, panic, and despair. From the back of the room, Detective Williams of the Financial Crimes Unit stepped forward. His voice was steady and official as he announced that formal charges were already being prepared. The FBI was reviewing the evidence for federal prosecution. The state attorney general's office was pursuing civil penalties. And, as of that morning, Deirdre Pickering's real estate license was permanently revoked. The community vote that followed was unanimous and swift. The entire board was removed on the spot. Deirdre and her cronies walked out in humiliation, trailed by cameras capturing her final tantrum, screaming about conspiracies and lawsuits while Chad physically restrained her from lunging at anyone. In her wake, we appointed temporary leadership, hired an independent management company, and voted by acclamation to pursue full criminal prosecution. As the media captured her breakdown the moment her empire finally collapsed, I took the microphone, my voice steady, words rehearsed for weeks. My great and always said communities are built on trust and not fear, and for the first time in years, Willowbrook Estates finally felt like a community again. Today, we take our community back. The standing ovation lasted 5 full minutes, echoing like thunder through the community center. It wasn't just applause, it was vindication. For every elderly neighbor who'd been bullied. For every family driven from their home. For every resident who'd stayed silent out of fear until now. Justice served lukewarm and satisfying in a room that smelled like coffee, triumph, and floor wax. Former HOA president sentenced to 4 years in federal prison for embezzlement and mail fraud. Deirdre's guilty plea came only after her new and actually competent attorney explained that fighting the evidence would be like arguing with gravity. Chad got 18 months as her accomplice. Her nephew's landscaping company collapsed after the IRS unearthed some creative tax interpretations that made her bookkeeping look almost innocent by comparison. The government seized $312,000 in assets from frozen bank accounts, real estate, and yes, that ridiculous BMW that had become the symbol of her suburban reign of terror. We used every recovered dollar to actually improve the neighborhood. Imagine that. The pool was professionally cleaned for the first time in years, sparkling like it belonged in a brochure instead of a biohazard warning. Monthly HOA dues dropped from $180 to $95, proving that honest management costs less than organized crime. We built a new playground with the reclaimed funds, a bright, joyful space that became a symbol of what a united community could achieve. The same kids once cited for chalk drawings were now laughing on swings purchased with their former tormentors' stolen money. Poetic justice in motion. My new venture, Marcus Cleaning and Property Solutions, took off faster than I expected. Word spread quickly in HOA circles. Apparently, I'd become the go-to guy for communities recovering from corruption. In my first year, I helped 23 associations recover over $1 million in stolen or mismanaged funds. Not bad for someone who'd been broke and nearly homeless just months earlier. The movement spread beyond Colorado. The state legislature passed a new law and officially dubbed Marcus's Law. It required public financial audits for all HOA letters with more than 25 homes, added whistleblower protections, and made board-level theft a criminal offense. Soon, other states followed. Turns out HOA corruption was a national epidemic. We just lit the match that started the cleanup. We turned Great Aunt Millicent's garden into the heart of our reborn community, a memorial rose garden beside the community center, complete with a little free library where neighbors could trade tools, books, and gardening tips. The stray cats still came by for their daily meals because traditions, like justice, deserve consistency. The community fund we'd built now provided scholarships for elderly residents facing financial hardship. Gladys, of course, appointed herself unofficial community historian, chronicling our transformation from fear-based dictatorship to functioning democracy. Sophia finished her paralegal certification and launched a nonprofit for HOA abuse victims. Bob took charge of the infrastructure committee, ensuring that every dollar spent on maintenance translated into actual, visible improvement. The second annual Millicent Day drew over 200 attendees, including families from neighboring towns who'd heard about our turnaround and wanted to see what genuine reform looked like. Local media covered it as a model of how ordinary people could make extraordinary change by refusing to tolerate abuse. Last month, a documentary film crew showed up. They were particularly fascinated by our legal strategy. Apparently, our case had become a template for HOA reform nationwide, studied in law schools and cited in courtrooms from California to Florida. I like to think my great-aunt would have loved that, knowing her meticulous note-taking and dogged persistence were now helping teach future lawyers how to stand up to bullies and blazers. But for me, the real reward came in quieter moments: evenings walking through Willowbrook, watching kids play without fear of fines, seniors tending gardens without harassment, and neighbors chatting instead of hiding behind curtains. The smell of barbecue had replaced the stench of intimidation. Laughter echoed where fear once whispered. Property values climbed 12%, proof that trust and integrity raise home prices faster than any paint code enforcement ever could. Who would have guessed? Sometimes, the system can work, but only if good people stand up and make it work. My great-aunt taught me that communities are worth fighting for, and that David beats Goliath with the right mix of evidence, persistence, and solidarity. So, what's your whole horror story? The good, the bad, the absurd? Drop it in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales of ordinary people standing up to extraordinary corruption.